working on a case dealing with behavior. And so this sort of thought process came to mind that I think it would be relevant to some parents. And so I'm going to share it here today because I believe that what would be beneficial in understanding children with differentiated learning behavioral issues that's connected with their diagnostic profile, that feed into also academic difficulties, communicative limitations, social emotional deficits, and the expectation by the institution, and the institution being the government school. I think all of those things, there's so many factors that collide that we as parents or as advocates or even as educators look at it and we go, well, behavior plans, and you go through these cycles or these steps, but if you do not understand all the components, all of the outside sort of peripheral components, some of these things can have a bigger impact on the continuity of a child's program and the positive implementation, and finally are identifying and solving the problem when it comes to these behavioral complexities. Okay, it's not enough to sit there and read the law. And when it comes to behavior, guys, the law's like this. There's only a couple pages when it comes to providing direction on behavior intervention plans and functional behavior assessments. And you go, well, why is that? Well, that's because we're still relying upon the 2004 version of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It has not been updated by Congress. So it's due for an update. And during those updates, that's when these things, as far as peer-reviewed, scientifically known approaches that are beneficial to resolving these issues, we as a society evolve and we grow up in some of these areas. And this is one of those areas to where it has been an underserved area and an area that hasn't been understood that well through the years. And keep in mind, taking this back to the beginning, the entire reason that the IDEA was developed, if you were to read the preamble or the purpose, the mission statement of the IDEA, it was to address through a civil rights act that just happens to have funding attached to it, to supplement state and local funding, not supplant it, to supplement it. It's not meant to fund special education in whole. It never was. All right, that's an absolute misconception and one I hear all the time, specifically from school people. Well, they're not funding special education. It was never meant to do that. All right, because it's a Civil Rights Act. And the entire purpose and mission statement of the IDEA was to address and resolve the issue of historical disenfranchisement, abuse, and neglect from the government education systems when it came to children with disabilities and special needs and differentiated learning. I'm going to throw that in there as well. So that's what it's there for. So you sit there and you take that, and every time it's been amended and updated by Congress, we learn a little bit more, and more is inserted into it and expanded. When it comes to disciplinary protections, that has been a relatively, in the scheme of things, that has been a relatively new insertion in there with regards to navigating student rights when it comes to disciplinary action taken by schools against children that have been identified as needing an IEP or a 504. Now, why has it been fairly recent as far as an addition? I'm imagining that it's because it wasn't until the mid-90s, guys, that things like zero tolerance came into play, because that's when, the 1994 crime bill was passed. And, of course, who passed it? Well, Bill Clinton passed it, but it was introduced and pushed through by our now president, Joe Biden. And it's been disastrous. The crime bill has, and also paved the way within it to provide grants to the public schools to adopt zero tolerance back in the mid-90s and late 90s, and schools adopted zero tolerance. Now we're 20 something years removed from that. The grant money is not there, but everybody has adopted zero tolerance as a result. And then because we're so far removed and we've had so many new people, couple generations pass through these boards of education and in administration, nobody knows that we had life before zero tolerance and we handled things differently before then. Well, ever since then, you've seen an increase in what became known and what is known as the school to prison pipeline, and in overreach there of referrals over to juvenile. We've also increased, really stepped up the presence of police in schools. I do not agree with that. I do not support it. I know a lot of people do. A lot of people go, oh, safety, safety, safety. But then you have this other conundrum that is inserted in there known as mission creep. And because we have ill-defined boundaries establishing the role of SROs inside the school and how they should be used and how they should not be trampling on the rights of identified students and frankly, they shouldn't be trampling on anybody's rights. That's just my viewpoint. But they have ill-defined parameters and mission. And because there's ill-defined boundaries, and this goes with the law, guys, and it happens in a lot of legislation and it happens in a lot of governmental plans, that if you have ill-defined boundaries, then the government or the people implementing will continue to expand and expand and expand and grasp and grab for more power and grab for more influence, which then results in more funding. That's mission creep, guys. That's what that concept is. And it is so prevalent within the public schools, which means it is chipping away at the amount of money that is then reserved for the actual purpose of government schools and why parents send their children, and that is to get an education. And there's so many things inside of the public school or the government schools now that has chipped away. You've basically let the camel into the tent, stuck its nose in at first, but now the whole damn thing is in there, and you find yourself outside in a sandstorm. As a parent, they don't want your input. You have very little influence anymore, and that's because we have allowed for these ill-defined boundaries to be so pervasive within our government schools. Now, as a parent, because your child has an IEP, you have the parameters to be able to advocate and advocate effectively. But at the same time, you have to know what the law is. And if you don't know the law, then you don't know how to implement it. But at the same time, knowing the law just isn't enough, because you don't understand all of the other peripheral factors that go into it. You need to know that, which is what I'm explaining here, which is exactly what I teach in my Advocates University course. So that going in with just the law, guys, a lot of times that's insufficient. And, you sit there and you find yourself, well, I know the law, and then you end up getting no's on the other side. And I'm talking about confident, ignorant no's. And you go, well, I don't, but I know the law, and this is what the law says, and I'm getting resistance. Well, you're getting resistance because of these peripheral factors. And most parents don't know about these, or advocates don't know about these peripheral factors, and they don't take them into consideration. And as a result, they don't know how to navigate around those additional obstacles. In some ways, there's no way around it, depending on the bad principal or the bad SRO, or that they're confident in their ignorance, and there's nothing more dangerous in this world than a government employee, whether they have a gun as a police officer or whether they have a pen as an IRS agent, can do a hell of a lot of damage with their confident ignorance, okay? Because that's an exertion of power utilized against people that there's a differentiation between that power relationship. Okay, doesn't make it right. It doesn't make them good. It doesn't make them moral. It doesn't make them ethical or correct. But it is the reality of our world. This is why we have civil rights acts. This is why we have our Constitution. It's why we have our Bill of Rights. Because humans by nature want to sit there and exert control for some strange, bizarre reason over other people instead of minding their own freaking business. And that's sort of how this country was supposed to be established. Now, is it perfect in its history? Of course not. Why? Because humans are a factor. And I'm a human. I love humans, and most of the people I interact with, I do so on a daily basis in a very peaceful, civil manner. And most of us, that is our daily interactions with other people. The only time, really, that our rights as humans and as citizens of a country are ever infringed upon is because of government and its employees. If you think about it. You know, if you're fined, if you're taxed, if you're jailed, if you're ticketed, it doesn't matter. These are all government employees, guys. And you sit there and you go, well, you know, but this, no, a lot of the time it's not done for any other reason than to exert a form of control over you that by and large, if it was approached in a different way, was completely unnecessary. Take that information, put it down in the public school realm, and now you have one of the major factors and problems when it comes to behavior intervention plans. Behavior intervention plans are intended to be an insular, temporary, protective coat around your child that's meant more for the public school and the administration than it is for the child. All right, the child has the disability and the child has the behaviors that impede their learning or the learning of others. We know that. That's the IEP team knows that. They have the evaluative data to support that. And so at that point, what you could do is you go, well, we'll create goals. Well, the goals doesn't necessarily let everybody know or provide everybody notice. Notice is important in the law. You know, that you have other people informed that this child has a disability and this child is going to engage in behaviors that sometime is going to be a violation of the current student code of conduct. And so you see where the IEP team by itself doesn't need a behavior plan because they already know that the child has behaviors that infringe or impede their learning. It is everybody else that needs to be aware that the child, and that includes administration. And so that's why a behavior plan is more of a declaration to administration and staff and SROs that, hey, this child has a disability and they require a little bit of understanding. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't suspend them, because they can, for little to no reason, for up to 10 days within a school year. Now, those 10 days can be all at once. It can be 1 day here, 3 days here, whatever, as long as it doesn't surpass that 10 days. So it's not like the schools are somehow stripped of their ability to discipline a child for whatever they want. They can for up to that amount of time without triggering a manifestation determination. Now, the manifestation determination is important because the manifestation determination helps the team analyze the child's behavior comparative to the incident and determine whether that incident is directly related and has a substantial connection to the child's disability. All right, that's always question one. And that's not their, and I said to their disability, guys. So a lot of schools misapply that even, and they'll sit there and say, well, the child has a specific learning disability, when in reality, their diagnostic feature is ADHD or autism. And no, you don't do that analysis for that first question based upon the specific learning disability. Their exceptionality isn't necessarily their diagnostic profile. It needs to be off their diagnosis, okay? Not their exceptionality. That could be completely different. Okay, so it needs to be off the diagnostic profile. But let's say that the school goes, well, I don't think that it doesn't have a substantial connection to the child's disability, whatever incident occurred. Well, that second question is equally as important, is did the school district follow the IEP? And let's say the school district didn't follow the behavior plan as written. Well, we're not punishing or punitive toward the child who has the disability, who the school and the staff have been provided notice. Now, whether or not they provided everybody notice, that's not my fault. That's not my client's fault. That's your fault as the institution for not allowing everybody to understand the nature of this child's disability that has interaction and responsibilities with that child. So if there's a behavior plan out there and somebody who isn't that familiar with the child somehow triggered a response, then we don't punish the child and weren't punitive toward the child for the failure of the institution not to properly keep informed staff. But I can tell you, setting enough of these meetings, they never look at themselves, because the government has a real problem of self-reflection. All right, you sit there and, I mean, it's like being in a relationship with a narcissistic individual that cannot see anything but themselves. They have no empathy, they have no sympathy, and there's a huge power differential. That's what dealing with the government school is like. Why is that? Well, it is narcissistic, and it is, but why? Because the tools that it uses overwhelmingly in these situations, and in any situation, any interaction with you and with our children, there's two things that it does, is it bulldogs and bullies. It fines, and the other one is it uses violence or threats of violence. Those are the tools that the government has at its disposal. All right. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, it's altruistic. I mean, look at all the government, programs, and it helps people with regards to insurance, Medicaid and Medicare, and look at the welfare program. Yeah, I get all of that, guys, but I also understand that there's a hell of a lot of connections involved in a lot of hoops that you have to obey, and they still use threats if you do not use or do exactly what they say in these programs. Threats of having it taken away. Also, there's a predominant impact with regards to a connection, definitive connection with parents and families that are on government assistance and Medicaid. They have an overwhelming connection with CPS or DHR. And that is not the case for other families that are what I would consider financially independent. So, anybody that goes, oh, it's so nice and look how it helps. No, and then the other thing, it's helping by taking from other people. This money doesn't come out of thin air, guys. It's taken from other people in order to redistribute. So to sit there and go that how nice government is, no. But even in these programs, these safety net programs that are intended to help people, like I told you, statistically, they have more interactions with police and they have more interactions with CPS DHR. So those aspects that I just talked about with regards to threats and use of their tools of violence, bullying, and things and fining, it's all still there. So within the public school realm, that is what they do. Now, when it comes to the small pages within the IDEA and in 504, it specifically references that the schools must use positive behavior intervention. Specifically references that. It does not reference using punitive or what they call reductive consequences for a student. Why? Well, we know that 9 times out of 10, that is not an effective way to modify or change a human person's behavior. It just isn't. Very rarely do reductive or punitive consequences result in changed behavior. There are some humans where that might be effective, okay? But most humans, that is not what touches them, reaches them, affects them, and changes them. All of us are examples of it. How often do you respond? Let's say as a teacher, as an administrator, as a parent, how well do you respond to negative and punitive consequences for whatever mistakes you make? And think about that honestly. And so now you have these little humans that are just miniature adults. Many of them with disabilities that they may be 12 physically, but social emotionally they're more like 6, and we don't take that into consideration. A lot of the government school employees do not take that into consideration, that for a 6-year-old this is normal behavior. Or let's say they have more moderate to severe impactations, to where they could be 15 physically but act like a 5-year-old, 3-year-old, along with a limitation on communication. But we don't think about that as adults. We see a physical 15-year-old, and so therefore the government school responds in like. And it wants its pound of flesh. My God, it wants its pound of flesh. It wants to, because I don't know why. I don't know why the direction is. It's almost like you must obey us. It's an affront to us as a government power. If we give an inch, you'll take a mile. If we show weakness, if we show empathy, then everybody's going to want that. And I hear this and I see it in action, and it is so ridiculous. It is such a ridiculous mindset. But like I said, that's how government employees are trained. That's how they think for some reason. And like I said, they look at their tool chest and they see hammers. Even though the law says positive behavior intervention, and there's a lot of very, very good special education directors out there that they're trying to fight against this system of principals and the system of SROs and superintendents, that their viewpoint is a very narrow perspective along the lines of what I just explained. And so we have a lot of good special education directors out there that are trying to change that system, within. And I don't think that, historically, I just don't think that they've made a lot of progress. I think some can, and they can during the time that they're there. And I thank God for them, because we see, like I said, that insular benefit for students during those times when that personality or who they are as a leader is infused into this process. And so I do award and congratulate them, and I appreciate them, and other parents should as well. And there's more than a few of them on this page, and if they're watching, then they know who I'm talking about. So it's not everyone, it's not everywhere, but it does happen. So even though the law says you must use positive behavior interventions, because the law does not explicitly say you shall not use reductive or negative consequences or punitive consequences, because it doesn't explicitly say that, of course, lawyers have argued since then successfully that an omission is not a prohibition. So they're able to use that, but they're supposed to also use positive behavior intervention approaches. But at the same time, we're not going to get anywhere, guys, with regards to a behavior plan if we're just churning the behavior plan and doing what's called sort of a maintenance of the child's behavior. We're tolerating it. We're accommodating it. No, guys, the intent is to provide a temporary protective shield around the child, keeping in mind that the school still has the ability to suspend a certain amount of days, things like that. But in whole, everybody in the school should be aware that this child temporarily, because that's the goal, can't follow the student code of conduct as written. Then we need a good functional behavior assessment. We need somebody that's competent and understands how to analyze behavior and not throw together these forms that come from the State Department that throws out these check marks. Everybody's not a check mark, guys. Some of this behavior is very complex. And especially you don't want teachers doing their own FBA, because what if they themselves are the trigger? They can't observe that. They can't observe that they are a trigger. And that doesn't mean that it's a bad teacher. It means that they don't mesh. And that's okay. There's a lot of humans out there that don't mesh with me, believe me. They'll be the first ones to tell you they don't mesh with me. So I avoid, it's not like I walk around, understanding that everybody loves me. I understand that. Same thing with my daughter. I understand that her autism is such to where there are certain personalities, they just will not gel, and they never have, and we historically know that. And so we go out of our way in our IEP meetings to ensure that the staff working with her have the right temperament. Because if they don't, then it's just as a disaster for the staff, just as much as it is for my daughter. And we don't want that. No parent wants that. And educators don't want that. But I don't live in this fantasy world, claiming that everybody should love my child and everybody should get along with her. That's just not reality. So if you have a child exerting behavior and you're having a teacher that is, they're saying, do a FBA. Well, that's not a good FBA because behavior is observable. But then on top of it, if you don't have the expertise to understand human behavior, like let's say a behavior analyst, a psychologist, then at that point your observations, it'd be like somebody coming in who is a mechanical engineer and they're saying, hey, we want you to implement this reading program. Could they do it? I mean, they're a mechanical engineer, by God. They probably could stumble through something, but it doesn't mean it would be effective. It doesn't mean the child would make progress. So I prefer if teachers stay in their lane. But in the area of behavior, because of laws like this, it doesn't mandate or dictate that we have to use a behavior analyst. And I think that those things need to change within the school. I believe, and I also don't agree with having schools create and make up these phantom and fake titles like, behavior specialist. I don't know what kind of training you got. I don't know who you got that from. But I do understand behavior analytics, and I understand their ethics, and I understand their requirements, and I understand that they're data-driven, and I understand the science behind it. And I understand that behavior is observable. I understand that you need to observe that behavior from a neutral perspective, not from a school perspective and not from a parent perspective, but from a child perspective. What is going on here? What are the triggers that are causing the behavior? And then what would the resulting consequence be? Consequence isn't a bad word, guys. There's good consequences. So in trying to analyze that, but a good FBA, once we understand the triggers for these behaviors, then we can get to work as a team identifying the solution in the form of consequence, good consequences primarily, because that's what changes behavior. But then understanding what are the other components that need to be inserted in there so we can target that behavior. Because the goal is to target it, okay? Target the behavior with skill acquisition. So we have skill acquisition. At the same time, the expectation is that behavior, that unwanted behavior, and that behavior that's impacting the pseudocode of conduct is decreasing. And then once we get success there, then we target another behavior and we target another behavior, but the behavior must be targeted with skill acquisition to replace whatever that response is that we don't want. Okay? And it's got to be attached to a carrot, guys. We all go to work because we get a paycheck at the end of that. We may not enjoy our work, but we get a paycheck at the end of it. That's our positive reinforcement to keep us going to a place that we don't necessarily enjoy every day. So a lot of these ABA principles are already inserted in our society, in our everyday life, and you don't even know it. But it's the same principles for our children. And I think that the government institution is so myopic, but it's also so narcissistic, and it only sees itself, and it only looks at the tools that it has. There are exceptions that will look at positive behavior interventions, but I've had some children that they respond very well to gift cards. Apple gift cards for music or to a shoe store or to Amazon or for their Xbox. These incentives, even though they're connected to financial incentives, and I know that just really does piss off a school system. Paying a kid to be good? Well, they're paying you to be good to a point, and you're not as a principal. You're bad, but yet they pay you. I just don't understand this idea. But if the goal is to create a replacement behavior that's attached to an incentive, and you're getting a decrease in behavioral responses from the child, and they're learning a new skill, then guys, at some point, you're able to strengthen the child's muscles, figuratively with regards to their behavior and their understanding in this area, to the point where you're able to create more distance between, the socially appropriate behavior, or what we're deeming as socially appropriate behavior, and extending the time to access the reward. And then at some point, you be able to fade that stuff out, the goal. And then at that point, you also might have the ability, and that's the goal, to get rid of the behavior plan altogether, because there's no need for it, because we attacked it and targeted it through skill acquisition. And then at that point, the child's behavior has improved. Now you can show tangible, measurable progress on the child's IEP. You can stand there with confidence saying that this child has been provided a FAPE. And then people like me analyze it and we go, yeah. And believe me, parents aren't calling me if that's the result. Parents don't call me when their children are making progress. Okay? I just don't get those calls. But you must understand those peripheral factors so you understand how to navigate around it. You need to understand who's doing your FBA. You need to understand the purpose behind the behavior plan, that it's insular, temporary, supposed to be. But the behavior plan by itself is insufficient, guys. It needs to be connected to goals. Those goals need to make sense, and those goals must be created in such a way that it's replacing the child's bad or negative behavior responses. This is our goal. Whatever this is connected to, this is the alternative to create a good response so that this continues to decrease. And then what services are needed? There needs to be services. We don't manage behavior. We don't accommodate behavior. And I see that too many times in behavior plans. So the behavior has to be connected to services. Who is teaching those skills? And if it's a resource teacher, where the hell did they get the expertise to do that? And if they're using TeachTown, okay. Are you just sitting a kid in front of a TeachTown episode? It's like watching Family Ties or Brady Bunch, guys. There's good lessons in there, but can you generalize those good lessons from that 30-minute episode of Brady Bunch or from Little House on the Prairie? I'm aging myself as a Gen Xer, but that's the whole thing, is can the child comprehend and put into practice those things that you're putting them in front of a computer and expecting self-directed learning to occur and result in some kind of magical transformation? But if they're also, as a resource teacher, throwing this child at you with a complex behavior diagnostic pattern and saying, fixing social services, 10 minutes a day to check on them, that's not tangible. I don't understand where you're going with this. I don't understand your training and expertise to be able to teach replacement skills. This is why your IEP team should contract with or hire and get involved in your child's IEP team a good ethical behavior analyst, where your child is the client, not the school system. The child should be the client. The child should be the focus, and this individual, this professional, should be neutral. And as time goes on, guys, they're going to revise and they're going to update the IDEA. But years ago, guys, we didn't have OTs and speech language pathologists necessarily as natural components on an IEP team if the need was there. But for some reason with behavior, it's like this foreign concept that hey, we need a behavior expert, like a behavior analyst, because I know their ethics, I know their requirements, I know their training. Just having a title of behavior specialist doesn't tell me squat. I don't know where you got that from, and I don't know what makes that an expert. And so if you have a behavior specialist working on your child's team and you have recurring behavior or a lot of negative consequences for your child to where they're in-school suspension all the time, silent lunch, silent snack, being denied PE access, things like that, those are all punitive consequences. And if that is not changing your child's behavior, then what it is it's mental, it's mental abuse. It's mental abuse, guys, by a governmental institution. And quite frankly, it is also the precursors of creating bullying for that child, because as the government entity, as the government power, you are displaying and exerting your violence and your bullying onto this child. The other students can see that, guys. They're not blind to it. And they can see who is being picked on, who the runt is in the litter. And then everyone else will crowd them out, because that's a nasty human trait that we have. That's why people like me exist, because I'm trained to see the runt in the crowd, the one that doesn't fit within the confines of the majority. And I will fight for them, as you will for your child, okay? Make them see your child, but understand what you're dealing with, and understand that you're not going to change this governmental system. It's always been, and it will always be. It's been like this for thousands of years. It just has had different names: king, queen, emperor, tyrant. It doesn't matter. Government is government. It always has been government, and it will continue to be government. You just need to understand what you're dealing with. And this law is meant for you. This law is meant, but sometimes, like I said, you're dealing with narcissistic, very narrow-minded, confident, ignorant people that think that they're doing the right thing, and they think that they understand the law. You try to navigate through it civilly. And then, of course, at the end result, yeah, you may need due process. You may need mediation. You may need an attorney like myself. But educate yourself through this process. Hopefully this video helps. But then, like I said, we offer Advocates University, and we hopefully will continue to do a spring and a fall for Tier 1. I always do a Tier 2, which is the advanced level during the summer, or I have been. I can't say always. I have been. I plan to do it this summer. But this is where you raise the bar of your understanding so that you can put it into practice confidently.